Welcome aboard, Captain G, for episode 5 of Order of Battle, Soviet Union. First, a word on the color palette. Did not go with red or a shade of brown. Early on, when I was deciding to paint my pieces, I was heavily influenced by a few videos I saw. Mr. Poppleton in Idaho and Matt Todd really had this unique olive shade of green for the Soviets that I really enjoyed. I could not paint to the detail or anywhere close to the fantastic units they had, but the color palette heavily inspired. I wanted to call that out up front. I love the look of these Soviets. With the militia, the Soviets do have the largest variety of militia units, all in the kneeling, crouching, firing positions, and that's because I'm trying to get as many as I can. In the YouTube wars that I've watched, on the first turn after the Soviets and Germany go to war, I've seen people buy 20, 30, 40, or even 90 militia at once. Even with chips, I have a large number of militia to build up to be ready for that. Combat Miniatures is the only place I know of that you can buy individual pieces like this, and so I pick them up whenever I can on my orders. Infantry out of the box for regular infantry, blue base for the Marines. Our elite infantry, in this case, is the Soviet Guards units. Like the sculpt I use for the airborne, but I don't use the airborne very often in our games, and still TBD on whether or not I'll go ahead and create an elite version. If I have to, I'll pick up some more of these sculpts and do the black and white cookie pattern for the elites. And that takes us to the Soviet Mountain, another of those modern infantry styles from HBG with the backpack that I enjoy. Artillery class, our house-ruled fixed position artillery, the Axis and Allies 1940 Europe version of the anti-aircraft, augmented in anticipation of the new anti-air rules in version 4. I expect we'll see more anti-air in the gameplay just from the way I interpret the rules on how effective they are. For artillery, the versions of the game that I built everything off of, only the Allied or American artillery was available for the Soviets. I call this my Lend-Lease arsenal of artillery. I may someday swap it out, but for now I'm happy with it. Love this sculpt for their advanced artillery, as well as the HBG self-propelled artillery. Great unit. Everyone's favorite, and mine as well, the Katyushas for the advanced self-propelled artillery. And only in setting this up today did I realize that with the version 4 rules, the Katyusha is its own national unique unit, and I still need another generic self-propelled unit to be the advanced. So I look forward to finding that, painting that, and adding that to my arsenal. For vehicle class units, the cavalry, Cossacks for the Soviets, armored cars, 3 different types of look like trucks, but they are the motorized with the wheels, the out-of-box mech, and then HBG's version of the mech with the open back red base. With the Axis and Allies 1941 game, all of the Allied nations come with this tank, which gave the Soviets a large number of them. With the other versions of the game, I had what I'm now using as the medium tank. So these were sort of surplus. I replaced what we had been using, which was the Axis and Allies classic armor, was every nation's tank destroyer. And once I did that, I decided to make these the Soviet tank destroyers for our table. Light armor with the yellow barrel, the medium tank, as I mentioned before, and then HBG's 3D version of the T-34. I really like the way these look. I went all red to contrast with the German all black Tigers as elite armor. They go well with the Guards infantry, so we call them our Guards tanks. And with version 4, the T-34 is also a nation-specific unit. And in the 1939 version, this takes the place of our KV heavy tanks as a special unit for the Soviets. And then finally, our heavy armor. This sculpt is, I think, technically another self-propelled artillery piece, but it's the biggest tank on the map, and so it's our heavy tank for our purposes. Going to the Soviet Navy, playing Axis and Allies, these pieces hardly get used. There are more of them involved in the 1939 game, and even more in 36. But the transport, the classic out-of-box transports work for us. Coastal submarine and fleet submarines, torpedo boat destroyer, and Soviet out-of-box destroyers. For the cruisers, the Italians stole those, so the Soviets had to turn to a neutral navy. And for heavy cruisers, Stalin bought some of these French heavy cruisers and added them to the Soviet Navy. The out-of-box battleship sculpt became the battle cruiser, and then by cutting off the end of the stern to lighten the load, it became the fast battleship. And you can see here an example of my early attempts at providing some shading and trying to, same with these tanks. Didn't really turn out well, any kind of detail painting I tried, so I gave that up early. The yellow tips for the Soviet battleship, very much inspired by Sky Marshal in one of his YouTube wars. Actually built a Soviet battleship, first time I ever saw that in a game. Loved the sculpt, had to go out and find it and add it to my table as well. I've yet to build it. Soviets did not fare well, I believe, in that YouTube war. May or may not have anything to do with the resources invested in the battleship, but love the sculpt. And then the also never used aircraft carrier. If the Soviets ever want a light carrier, I'll make one, but it's not come up before. This is the Soviet seaplane. I like the sculpt. Nothing more unique other than for the Soviet Air Force. Again, like the Army, I wanted a distinct look, so I went with this metallic silver. I like it. There's one exception, and I'll get to that in a moment. But out-of-box fighters for the Soviets, we bought a lot of them. On our games, we buy more aircraft for the Soviets than armor. Allows you to attack, and then you don't have to stay in the space for the counterattacks. You go back and land where you came from. That's the way we play. Jet fighters with the red tip look really nice with the stars. Tactical bombers, we have the out-of-box bombers with a little bit of black camouflage pattern, but again, another YouTube war inspired piece. I saw with the tactical bomber, the Soviets, and I liked the fact that they were sort of an outdated aircraft the Soviets were still using, and added that to our air fleet as well. Another Lend-Lease item, since the Italians also took the Soviet bombers, the British have Lend-Leased a few of these sculpts to Stalin, though he never really uses them that much. And then the strategic bomber and heavy strategic bomber. The engine counts are reverse of what they should be, and I write that off to central planning and Stalin's 5-year plan. Some of the Heavy strategic bombers have been repurposed as well as the new heavy transports once that was announced with version 4. Then finally, the regular transports. This is a repurposed Australian bomber. Wanted again to have that unique flavor and have a style of aircraft not seen elsewhere on the board. So that's why I use that one as opposed to the out-of-box classic air transport. And that is the Soviet Union. Like the bombers for Germany and the US, the alternate ending game sample pack had a gift for the Soviets, and that was this ginormous version of the heavy tank. And so Victory tank rolls through the streets of Moscow in a victory parade. If they happen to win, crushes the opposition. So not for gameplay, just for fun. I've been Captain G. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of our Order of Battle for Soviet Russia. Over and out.